Now, the argument, though, that they attempted to propose to try to justify population control to the broader American public at this point was anti-communism. What they argued was that the new exploding masses of the third world would be the cannon fodder of the communist world revolution, and so we have to have population control to help win the Cold War. This is simply in tune with the fact that during the Cold War, if you wanted to sell anything, whether it's moonshots or raises for teachers, you argue that it's to defeat communism. So but that's what it was, and it grew. Now, Eisenhower rejected population control, but ultimately it was accepted by the Johnson administration. We'll get to that later. Now, also during this period, you have very closely linked to these movements the anti-technology movement, and the first target is DDT. And I discuss it at length in the book. But the thing you have to understand about DDT is DDT was the most important advance in public health since the chlorination of water. It was introduced by the U.S. Army during World War II as a way to stop epidemics, starting in the city of Naples and then across Nazi-occupied Europe and in the Far East. And then it was used after the war to wipe out malaria in the American South and Southern Europe and much of South Asia and parts of Latin America. And by 1970, according to the National Academy of Sciences, DDT had saved 500 million lives. Okay? And yet a movement has started to suppress it. And some of the people involved in this movement were quite explicit about the fact that the reason why they didn't like DDT is because it was contributing to the population explosion. Alexander King, the head of the Club of Rome, said so explicitly. Aldous Huxley, who was a eugenicist, if you read Brave New World Revisited, he attacks DDT because it's causing the population explosion. Okay, but of course you're not going to convince the American people to get rid of DDT so that Africans will die. Instead, it's posed as an aesthetic argument because they say DDT is killing the birds. In fact, DDT was not killing the birds. Bird counts in the U.S. were going up strongly in the 50s and 60s, probably precisely because of DDT, because the main source of bird mortality in the wild is insect-borne disease. But nevertheless, the Environmental Protection Agency, despite hearings in which scientific evidence was shown that DDT was not harming wildlife or people, one of its first important acts of William Ruckelshaus, who was also an advocate of population control, I might add, was to ban DDT. And as a result of this, 3 million Africans, mostly children, died every year from malaria, which could have been wiped out as it was in many other parts of the world. Now, the DDT campaign also had another feature of transforming the dominant public guise of environmentalism in the U.S. from an aristocratic sort of right-wing movement, oh, what beautiful country this would be if not for all these ugly little shacks, to a radical movement of, the people against the corporations, a left-wing movement, and a mass movement. And scriptures were written for it, with the most important being those of Paul Ehrlich, the aforesaid population bomb, which we've already discussed. And his protege, by the way, is John Holdren, who is President Obama's science advisor today. And also we have the writings of the Club of Rome, 1972, in which they said we're basically going to run out of everything by 1990, so we have to stop economic growth. And of course, none of this came to pass. Well, we started 5 minutes late. Also in this period, the dominant left-wing organizations in this country had a makeover from anti-Malthusianism to zero-growthism. Another early target was nuclear power. Now, you must ask yourself, why target nuclear power? Nuclear power causes no pollution. I mean, I am a nuclear engineer, and many of us back in the 70s were baffled by the environmentalists' sudden rage against nuclear power when here they are complaining about air pollution and lack of fossil fuel resources, and this would solve both problems. Well, I think the reason is because nuclear power is subversive to the whole limits to growth thesis. Just to give you a sense of this, if you want to understand, if you took all the fossil fuel in the world, and that is known reserves, which is not all the fossil fuel there actually is, but if you took the known reserves of today, and converted it all into electricity at 7 cents a kilowatt hour, and divided it all up among the 7 billion people on Earth. So the common heritage of mankind, your share of the common heritage of mankind in fossil fuels would come out to about $100,000. If you took all the energy available from known fission resources and divided it up the same way, your share would come out to $22 million. Okay? So this is the difference. The nuclear power blows away the entire construct of limited resources requiring limited growth. Okay, so then we have the actual population control movement, which was finally sold to Congress in 1966, and based on Cold War alleged necessity. In fact, it was very detrimental to the U.S. in the Cold War because it was very off-putting to the countries. Because what they did was they passed a law that linked U.S. foreign aid to acceptance of population control by third world countries. And for instance, the Johnson administration, at the urging of Paul Ehrlich and certain other people in the administration who were part of this, denied famine aid to India unless they implemented forced sterilization programs. And Indira Gandhi capitulated to this, and they implemented these programs, and millions of Indian women were forcibly sterilized. And then this was done in many other countries around the world. And by the way, the guy who spearheaded this, Thorolf Ravenhold, he was a very smart operator. What he did was he took the money and he subcontracted it to Planned Parenthood and the Population Council and other leading organizations like this to implement the population control programs in numerous countries. And as a result, they all became very strong supporters of the program because they were getting paid. These programs are horrible, and they continue to be funded to this day. This year, $600 million of American taxpayer money will go to fund these programs which are being imposed on these countries. And they're top-down dictatorial, they're cruel, they involve lying to women that the operations are irreversible, they sometimes involve direct gunpoint coercion, they are frequently racist in their implementation, given that, like in Peru, it's done by the Spaniards against the Andean people, in India by the Brahmins against the untouchables, and so forth. This is a major atrocity being done with your money. Now, a place, though, where it's not being done predominantly with your money or by the dictate of the U.S. State Department, but by local elites acting on their conviction of these ideas themselves, is China. Okay? And these ideas were directly picked up by the Chinese elites from the Club of Rome, and they implemented their one-child policy. And the thing you got to understand about the one-child policy is this is horrific. It is not a matter that the government says you can only have one child, so people only have one child, and isn't that unfortunate you can't have a second child? Because people do have second children regardless. And you have to ask yourself what happens then. And what happens then is unless somebody is really in tight with the regime or has been a really good snoop and so forth, the second child is taken away from them and put in a so-called orphanage where if they are not adopted in short order, they are done away with. And according to Chinese dissident organizations, over 100 million baby girls have been killed under this policy. Okay? So this is horrible. And though it's even worse than that, because you must ask yourself the following question. What happens if China becomes a global superpower and its elites are still believers in these sorts of ideas? What does that imply for the rest of the world? What did it imply for Eastern Europe when Germany, which had been convinced of these ideas, was able to exercise itself outside of its domain? So this is potentially the great catastrophe of the 21st century waiting to happen. Okay, and in Africa it's even worse. Skip that. We have these organizations, particularly the European Greens, operating against genetically improved foods. There's a direct Nazi heritage here. The Nazis were enormous believers in organic foods, and the founder of the German Green Party, Olof Hausleiter, was a member of the Nazi Party since 1923, and this became a major plank. But these foods could eliminate vitamin malnutrition in the third world. Here you have these people stopping it.